Imagine you wake up one morning, open your laptop, and Windows asks you again to restart for an update you never approved. Again, your taskbar has frozen. Again, the start menu is unresponsive. Again, and somewhere in the background, a little Copilot widget is quietly harvesting your screen activity whether you want it to or not. You have been putting up with this for years. But here's the thing, millions of people just stopped putting up with it. And the release that finally pushed them over the edge dropped on April 23rd, 2026. It is called Ubuntu 26.04 LTS, codenamed Resolute Raccoon. And the numbers coming out right now are unlike anything the Linux world has ever seen. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why the desktop computing world is at an inflection point and what you should do about it. Let us go back a few years to understand how we got here. Microsoft spent most of the last decade making bets that users would just go along with whatever they decided. Windows 11 launched with a hardware wall. TPM 2.0 was required, leaving hundreds of millions of perfectly functional PCs stranded. The message was clear: upgrade your hardware or get left behind. Then came Windows 10's end of support on October 14, 2025. 10 years of the most successful Windows release in history quietly put to rest. Microsoft gave users three choices: pay for extended security updates, upgrade to Windows 11 on compliant hardware, or find something else. What Microsoft did not expect was how many people chose option 3. Meanwhile, Ubuntu was doing something quiet and methodical. Release after release, version after version, the Canonical team was sanding down every rough edge that had historically scared off mainstream users. And with Ubuntu 26.04, they did not just sand down the edges, they rebuilt the floor. Ubuntu 26.04 LTS ships with GNOME 50, and that is not a small thing. GNOME 50 is a full user interface overhaul with redesigned animations, smoother Wayland performance, and a desktop that, for the first time in Linux history, genuinely feels like it was designed by people who care about the person sitting in front of the screen. It ships with Linux kernel 7.0, which brings massive performance gains, updated Intel and AMD graphics support, and first-class compatibility with newer hardware, including laptops running Snapdragon X2 chips. There is a brand new default terminal. Snap applications are faster. The installer now handles dual boot setups with BitLocker-protected Windows partitions more gracefully than ever before. And the entire system makes a full switch to Wayland, meaning display rendering is cleaner, screen tearing is gone, and NVIDIA users who have been second-class citizens on Linux for decades are finally getting a proper experience out of the box. Now, here's the part nobody is really talking about. The features are impressive, sure, but features alone have never moved the needle on Linux adoption. What is different this time is the combination, the perfect storm of Ubuntu becoming genuinely good at exactly the moment Windows became genuinely unbearable. Microsoft spent the back half of 2025 in crisis mode. Windows 11 had critical bugs acknowledged 4 months after they first appeared. Start menu crashes, taskbar failures, file explorer breaking, system settings refusing to open. These were not edge case issues. These were the core UI components of the operating system. Then came Windows Recall, Microsoft's AI feature that screenshots your screen constantly and stores everything locally in an unencrypted database. Security researchers were horrified. Users were furious. Privacy advocates went on record calling it one of the most reckless default features ever shipped in a consumer operating system. And Microsoft kept pushing forward anyway. That is the villain in this story. Not Bill Gates personally, he left day-to-day operations at Microsoft decades ago, but the culture of a company that had grown so comfortable with its monopoly that it stopped treating users like people it needed to earn trust from. The victim is every person who bought a laptop in 2019, watched it get declared incompatible with Windows 11, felt the pressure to spend money they did not need to spend, and then watched the replacement OS ship broken for 6 straight months. The victim is the small business owner who just wanted their computer to work. The victim is the student, the freelancer, the developer, the gamer, who kept giving Microsoft the benefit of the doubt and kept getting burned. But here is the twist, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting. The exodus is not going to Linux instead of Windows. It is going to Linux alongside a complete philosophical shift in how people think about operating systems. StatCounter data shows Linux hit 4.7% global desktop market share by end of 2025, a 70% increase since 2022. The US crossed 5% for the first time in June 2025, and the velocity is accelerating in a way that is unprecedented. Going from 2% to 3% took 2.5 years. Going from 3% to 4.7% took less than 8 months. Germany announced it was migrating 30,000 government PCs to Linux. Steam reported Linux users at an all-time high of 3.58% on its hardware survey, up from roughly 1% in 2015. In January 2026 marked the moment when PC Gamer, How to Geek, and multiple major tech voices simultaneously declared that the year of the Linux desktop was not a meme anymore. It was a reality. And then, Ubuntu 26.04 dropped on April 23, 2026. This is not a coincidence. This is a release that Canonical timed, refined, and deliberately positioned as the most accessible long-term support version in Ubuntu's history. The minimum hardware requirements are a 2 GHz dual-core processor, 6 GB of RAM, and 25 GB of storage. That description fits tens of millions of PCs that Microsoft declared incompatible with Windows 11. Those machines are not dead. They are perfectly capable of running a modern, beautiful, fully featured operating system. And Ubuntu just handed their owners the key. The consequence of all this is still unfolding in real time, but the early signals are loud. The Linux subreddit has been flooded with posts from first-time switchers since Ubuntu 26.04 launched. YouTube tutorials for migrating from Windows to Ubuntu are seeing views climb by the tens of thousands in days, not weeks. Hardware vendors like Lenovo, Dell, and System76 have all expanded their Linux pre-install offerings going into 2026 because the demand is no longer theoretical. It is a paying customer base. The Linux operating system market, valued at just under $22 billion in 2024, is now projected to grow to nearly $100 billion by 2032, at a compound annual growth rate of over 20%. These are not bedroom hobbyist numbers. These are enterprise infrastructure numbers. These are the kinds of numbers that make board meetings uncomfortable at companies that have spent 30 years assuming desktop monopoly was a permanent condition. And here is why this matters to you. Right now, today, Windows 10 is no longer receiving security updates. If you are still running it, and as of late 2025, over 40% of Windows users still were, you are running an operating system that is accumulating unpatched vulnerabilities in real time. Windows 11 is available, but if your hardware does not meet the requirements, Microsoft will not budge on that. You have two realistic paths: buy new hardware or find a free, secure, fully supported operating system. Ubuntu 26.04 LTS is supported with security updates until April 2031. That is 5 years of protection on hardware Microsoft abandoned at zero cost. The longer you wait, the more vulnerable your current setup becomes. The threat is not some abstract future scenario. It is the reality of an unpatched machine sitting on your home network today. And the opportunity, Ubuntu 26.04, is already here. So here is what you can actually do right now. First, go to the official Ubuntu website and download the Ubuntu 26.04 LTSISO. It is free, it takes about 10 minutes depending on your connection, and it costs you nothing to try it. Second, instead of wiping your drive immediately, create a live USB using a tool like Rufus or Balena Etcher, boot into Ubuntu from the USB, and spend a few days using it without installing anything. See how your Wi-Fi works, test your peripherals, open your browser, check if your most important apps run. You will likely be surprised. Third, if you use any Windows-only applications, check Wine compatibility or find the Linux native equivalent before you make the leap. LibreOffice covers Microsoft Office for most users. GIMP handles basic Photoshop workflows. VS Code runs natively on Linux and is actually faster there than on Windows. Fourth, when you are ready to install, use the dual boot option during setup. Ubuntu 26.04's installer now handles this more gracefully than any previous version, including when your Windows partition uses BitLocker encryption. You do not have to choose between the two on day one. Run both, use both, and let your experience tell you which one earns your main partition. Fifth, join a community. The Ubuntu forums, the r/Ubuntu subreddit, and the broader Linux community are some of the most genuinely helpful spaces on the internet. The learning curve is real, but it is shorter than it has ever been, and you do not have to climb it alone. Here's the big picture. Operating systems are not just software, they are contracts. When you install an OS, you are agreeing to a set of terms about who controls your updates, who has access to your activity data, how much your hardware needs to keep pace with software bloat, and ultimately, who is the customer and who is the product. For most of the last 2 decades, Microsoft's implicit answer to that last question has been that the enterprise customer is the customer, and the home user is the data point. Ubuntu's answer has always been different. It is free because freedom matters. It is open because transparency builds trust. It is maintained by a community that includes professionals who use it and improve it because their livelihood depends on it being good. Ubuntu 26.04 Resolute Raccoon is not the end of Windows. Nothing is ending Windows tomorrow. But it is the clearest signal yet that the monopoly on the desktop is becoming optional. And in a world where your operating system is increasingly your digital identity, having a choice is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. If this gave you something to think about, drop a comment telling me whether you are on Windows, Linux, or somewhere in between. Hit that like button if you think Microsoft needs to hear this. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is the kind of content I put out every week. No hype, no filler, just real analysis of the tech decisions that actually affect your life. See you in the next one.